let me hit that. Okay, yes, Steve.
Oh, in the third paragraph of 18, it says, they said to him, where's your wife, Sarah, etc. And then he says, and when I return to you next year, your wife, Sarah, will have a son. Well, how did they know that? I thought who were these people that they knew that?
I mean, that's always the conversation, right? So let's see. Here it says in verse 2, it calls them men. But then let's go down. Blah blah blah. They said. The Lord said. Oh, this says men too. Hold on. Oh, we forgot also this whole thing with Abraham arguing with God. That's important.
Yeah.
Anashim. At some point it switches what it calls the same men. I'm looking for the verse where it officially calls them. Yeah, there we go. I guess it's not entirely clear in the text itself, but the general understanding of it is that then in chapter 19, when it says the angels arrived in Sodom that evening, because the men leave Abraham's tent and go towards Sodom, and then the next chapter says the angels arrived in Sodom, that then we understand that the men who visited Abraham were angels, and that's why they know about Sarah's and a lot of sometimes like birth announcements, miraculous birth announcements come from God directly, but they do also often come from angels. Like Samson is foretold by an angel. Yeah. So that's what's happening here. Dave Gilbert.
In verse 3 of chapter 18, begins Vayomer Adonai.
Yep.
Is he talking to God at that point? Because he's already run out and run to the men, and then he says Adonai. Does he recognize them as angels, apparitions of God? Why Adonai?
No, I don't think so. Adonai means Lord. So the same way we might call God the Lord, also like it's just a sign of respect. Come in, my lords.
Okay, so he's just greeting the men, or at least one of them, maybe their leader. I don't know. But I was just, that struck me. I thought, well, is this why he is so diligent that he says, oh, this isn't just ordinary strangers, passing through. This is God.
His awareness of them possibly being messengers of God is definitely something that is up for debate, because he doesn't argue when they say Sarah's going to give birth. He's not like, who are you and why do you know, like, what are you talking about? He just rolls with it. So I think it's definitely possible that he recognizes them for what they are, but that's not necessarily what Adonai means there.
Okay.
Because they also the servant in the next parsha uses it too for Abraham. He calls Abraham Adoni, my Lord, when Abraham is sending him off to go find Rebecca. So it's just a title or a term of respect as well. Let's see, Joel, what did you put in the chat? The Lord appeared to him. Yeah, so the Lord is. Oh, yeah, okay, capital letters, but that's not necessary. I mean, That's English. The Hebrew doesn't have capitals, so it's not as clear. But like in verse 1, it's Yud He Vav He, which we pronounce as Adonai because we don't say God's name, but we instead substitute in the Lord. But in the Hebrew, they're different words. The way they're written out is different. You
Oh, okay. No,
almost never is God referred to in writing as Adonai, like the word spelled out.
And it isn't here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
thank
That's
you for
another
clarifying
reason
that.
to be, hospitable to strangers. You don't know who they are and you never know.
Right. Isn't there
It could be a test.
something about the Messiah will be the beggar at the city gates or something? That Proverbs or Midrash? I don't remember where that's from. But yeah. Always be nice. Unless you're planting a tree. That's also a thing we're taught. If you're planting a tree and the Messiah comes, finish planting first before you go greet him.
How do you know if it's the
Uh-huh.
Messiah?
Well, I guess, I mean, that's like the other side of treat everyone like they might be the Messiah, just be hospitable to everyone, but also finish planting first. It's the priorities. Like Deuteronomy says, yeah, the trees can't move on their own. So just like,
Unless they fall down.
right.
I think I interrupted Joel. I'm sorry.
No,
What if God was one of us? Yep.
Joni Osborne, 1995.
Thank you, Joel.
Welcome.
All right. What else? Let's see. I think I do want to just say, clearly, Abraham is, as Joel said, the epitome of chesed, but I think he gets a tad too much credit for the whole, like, he offers one thing to the men and then provides something way more. Because it's really Sarah. Like, he says to the men, I'll provide you with a morsel of bread and some water. And then he goes and tells Sarah. So, I guess he gets the credit for having the idea. We don't know if she would have gone out of her way on her own, but she's the one that actually makes all the food. And I don't feel like she always gets enough credit for that too. That she's the one who really, makes the cakes and and gets such a great meal going.
And takes the curds and milk and calf.
Yeah. Some of
Prepares
that.
them.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
All right. Curds and milk and calf,
Yeah, I was
kosher? I mean,
I
or were laws of kashrut not then?
they didn't exist yet.
Okay.
So we know
So how do modern, later rabbis deal with that and explain, oh, you can't do that? And somebody else would say, well, Abraham did it, offered it to his guests. The angels of the Lord are munching down on it. What's the sin there?
I'm not sure. Okay, well, this is interesting. Bava Metzia points out that angels don't eat, but they appear to be eating because one should act in accordance with the prevalent custom. So
Oh,
that's not necessarily an answer to your question, but that's an interesting little
yeah, it
tidbit.
is.
What is kind of, if the angels didn't actually consume it, then, no foul.
But presumably
Right.
I mean, in a literary sense, if this was an ordinary fiction story, one could say this is a sort of a technique to separate before the laws were brought down and after the laws were brought down. And this is pointing out that the laws hadn't happened yet, and when they did happen, it changed our lives, sort of.
Yeah. I don't see anything in that really addresses the concern of in the commentaries. I don't see anything that they seem to be concerned with the kashrut here. And
Clout,
sorry, yeah?
I was just gonna say, Clout just refers to it and says the text is of course oblivious to later Jewish dietary laws.
Yeah,
And that's all it says, is no mention, is
right. Like
no,
there's no reason to think that Abraham would know those things. And we see, like we've talked about this a little bit before too, with the Parashat Noah, some of these questions, that Noah takes 2 of every unclean animal, but 14 of every clean animal, 7 pairs of every clean animal. What does that mean if there's no kashrut yet? And then similarly, then after the flood, God says, okay, you can eat meat now. That's a first, because in the Garden of Eden, it says only the plants are for you to eat. But then it says, but don't tear a limb off a living beast, and don't eat the blood with the animal. So that's the first step of kashrut. And that sticks around too, with as more prohibitions are added in Leviticus. Like that's still why kosher meat has to be drained and salted and stuff to make sure there's no blood in it. So it's layers. Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I love what Debbie said, and I love what Rabbi Goldstein said, that it's actually a progression. If I could push that back, it's really since creation that we observe this ethical progression. So when I was reading this, I immediately thought of Hamabul. Mabul is the flood with Noah. And I said, well, wait a minute. This to me seems like a metaphorization of the same story. It's the identical story. But in the flood, there was no conversation with Noah. God decided to do it, and he wiped out civilization. So if I look at Kabbalah, that would be the aspect of Gevura on the left side. Gevura means strength. It means Dayan, means judgment, din, very severe. Now, directly opposite that in Kabbalah is what I put in there first is chesed. And the point is made that Abraham, his entire life, he is pure chesed. Every act that he does is not gevura, it's chesed. So I then said, well, wait a minute. Now they're going to Sodom and Gomorrah. What's the first thing that God does as an ethical progression? God says, Abraham is going to be my partner in this whole deal. He's going to be the father of everyone sitting here today right in front of me. Okay, these are very special people. Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So anyway, from Gevura before, now God says, no, no, no. Now let's have a dialogue with Abraham. So I said, oh boy, this sounds good. I'm going to try to look into it. So of course I did look at 1825, and it starts off Halila Lacha, Halila Lacha. And I said, gee, I'm not that familiar with that. Let me see what that actually means. And it has to do with the word Chalel. Chalel means a profanation, being profane, as opposed to being holy. And of course, it says right there, it says, don't profane yourself. Don't look, come on, let's talk about this. Let's straighten this out. And that's the meaning of Hallel. So, of course, what I always do, I dream up this stuff. Maybe I have heard it somewhere. I don't really remember, but I will go to our medieval commentators and boom, 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 boom. They all say the same thing. So I don't know, maybe I read it before last year, 5 years ago, and it's stuck in my mind. And they all discuss that same issue around 1825. So I like to think, and I hope I can remember this every day, that I see a progression since the beginning of time. And it's taken HaKodesh Baruch Hu such a long time to kind of spell all this out, starting with unicellular organisms and moving up through evolution, now to us. And we were around here 195,000 years before we had any idea about writing. It wasn't invented yet. Even like in Torah, I'm seeing different aspects of learning languages. And from languages, it's moving on to what I'm going to call artificial intelligence. And I think we're entering a new phase in humanity. And like we do that already. You go to the doctor, and what are they doing? They draw some blood. And here, it's not the doctor who says, "Oh, well, yeah, I have an idea. Why don't you take this this special route?" No, we're going to use computer science. We're going to use technology. Let's analyze your blood. Let me do my treatment. So anyway, that's where I think we are. And I think we see a progression almost every day.
Hmm.
Every day.
When I read the beginning of this argument that we're talking about between, well, the negotiation, I guess I should call it, between God and Abraham, in the very beginning of it, Abraham says, shoot, I lost it. Verse 1825 again.
Mhm.
Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that the innocent and guilty fare alike. And yet later on in the history chapters that we read, time and time again, God tells his army or his general to wipe out everybody, no matter who. So I like this sentence in here. Yeah.
Although I think that's maybe also, again, part of the progression of, I don't know if that's necessarily moral by our standards, but the progression of God's relationship and the Abrahamic understanding of God's relationship with themselves, that because Moses uses a very similar argument, but only when it comes to the people of Israel. Like every time they do something dumb and God wants to wipe them out, so Rashi says here, the far be it from thee, like Joel said, it's a profanation of yourself. People will say that is what God does. God destroys everyone, the righteous and the wicked alike. And so Moses says the same thing, says, if you destroy everybody because, Korach and his people made you mad, destroy Korach, sure. But if you destroy everybody, then like the Egyptians will say, look how dumb those people are. They went off into the desert and their God let them all die. You don't want that God. So there's a lot of this sort of appeal to God's ego a little bit with this kind of thing. Like, and I think, I saw this recently, that this parsha is like the first time in all of history that we see the act of speaking truth to power. And although that phrase I think is coined by the Quakers, but you know, uh,
Credit where it's due.
what?
Credit where it is due.
Yeah, credit where it is due. That, you know, and I think like it's still true today when we speak truth to power, when we, you know, need to sort of challenge our leaders to do the right thing. We appeal to their leadership like this. You know, shall not the judge of all deal justly? Like, you know, we might do that kind of thing of like, surely you know that it is in the best interest of, you know, all of your constituents, of your, you know, of your next campaign to do this thing, you know, to do the right thing here, and blah blah blah. That I think there's still, you know, I think that's what Abraham's doing with God here.
Who are you talking to, Rabbi?
I talk to a lot of people.
No, in your presentation, I just had to laugh like you were presenting this to somebody, like, and so I just thought, wonder who she's got in mind.
Philip and I were talking recently about lobbying and
Mhm.
how you still have to do it even when the politicians are doing the thing that you want, because they most often only hear the negative feedback, and so they'll give in to the pressure and change their vote or their decree or whatever if you don't tell them
Yeah.
that you support the thing. So it goes both ways, you know, you got to tell them what justice is and let them know that
They're doing a good job.
they're doing a good job,
And keep
and
it
tell
up.
them when they're not doing a good job. But you got to
Right.
appeal to them, to their ego like that. You got to let them know this is justice and
Turn off the
we
sound for a
support
minute.
this action.
Turn off the sound for a minute.
Yeah.
Recalling that Lot is not in Abraham's bloodline. Is he not? He's his nephew.
Yeah.
It's not his bloodline. His
Oh,
father,
you mean
Son?
direct.
his father is Haran.
Right.
Haran is the deceased brother of Avram.
Right. Yeah.
Interestingly, they stopped at Haran with a chet. Chet means anger of God. So let's make that differentiation. And if we look at the story, we're supposed to find 10 righteous people. Okay? Apparently
Yeah.
they weren't there because the place was destroyed. But if you look at it, in Lot's family, there was Lot and his wife. There were 2 married daughters and 2 sons-in-law and 2 unmarried daughters. Boom, that's 10 people. So instead of looking outside of our homes, let's look at right inside our homes. Let's find the 10 people and live our lives in the way that's going to save the world.
I don't think those are mutually exclusive.
And the sons-in-law wouldn't come though, right?
Right. They were sodomites.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just being consistent with this Parsha. Now,
Yeah.
Parsha, I use the word metaporize, meaning let's just, we're not sure where this comes from. It's not history, but there's a lesson here. So let's look at the lesson. Maybe there's other ways around. I don't know.
Yeah.
And remember,
David, did you
we've
have?
been the remnant. We're the remnant. So whoever gets destroyed doesn't get destroyed. I'm here today. That's what I have to worry about, is what I'm doing today.
Yes. David, you had it. Did you have a hand up?
Yeah, I was just, when Abraham stopped at 10, said, I will say nothing more, you know, but will you spare the city for 10? It seemed to me that wouldn't Abraham, with his family and his servants and his household and so forth, wouldn't he have More than 10 people?
Well, Abraham doesn't live in Sodom, but I think that is similar to what Joel's point is, that Lot's family makes up 10, and that presumably, if Lot is worth saving, and for the most part, he and Abraham seem to have gotten along. There's no reason to believe that Lot's a bad guy. They go separate ways because there's just like not enough room for both sets of flocks, and their shepherds fight with each other, but they don't fight with each other. So I guess the question is, why didn't that influence extend to his wife and children and in-laws?
Maybe it's because, and I missed part of the conversation, and I apologize if I'm repeating, but maybe it's because even the Sodomites don't recognize Lot as a Sodomite. He's not one of us.
Right.
So if they don't recognize him, then they don't deserve the credit of him and his family.
Yeah.
I think they use the word guri, which means stranger, when they're speaking to Lot. When the men are outside his house, I believe it says guri, meaning, who are you? You just came here. You're a sojourner. I believe that's the word they use in 1917.
1917.
Try to find it.
No, not there. Yeah. The fellow came here as an alien, and already he acts as a ruler.
Which verse is that?
Verse 9.
19:9.
Yeah, 19:9. Yeah. And I think I think that's part of, I can't speak to why you have some sympathy for Lot's wife, but I think part of, we can't get to 10 because if the sons-in-law are sodomites, and like they they are of alike with all the others, then the daughters are also kind of by necessity lost to that way of life, because that's kind of how it was then. The wives had to assimilate to the husband's family and culture and whatever at that time. And so then we're down to just the four, the unmarried daughters and the wife, like at best.
Okay.
And I think Lot's wife, is among those that get a bad rap in the Torah, or more so in the Midrash, because we just don't know enough about them in the Torah, along with, she joins the ranks of Korach and Esau, and I don't know. Those are the ones that come to mind that I feel sorry for. But that, like, because she looks back, because she's a sodomite, they they treat her like she didn't deserve to live anyway. She is part of the problem. She was reminiscent for the sins of Sodom, whatever. But like, we don't know that. Her home is being destroyed. There's lots of people who escape terrible homes, and they're still nostalgic for certain parts of it. It's hard to separate yourself from that kind of stuff. So
And you assume that all this is happening, horrendous noises and lights and flashings, and how could you not look back to see what was happening? It would,
Yeah, that too. As like fire rains down from the sky. Yeah, I think I would look. Yeah, Dave Gilbert.
I had another issue, and that was when the men are demanding entry, Lot
Yeah.
offers up his 2 unmarried daughters and says to the crowd, do what you want with them. And that kind of seemed the same sort of, it has a kinship with the sacrifice of Isaac. Speaking as a father, I just couldn't see that happening with me and my daughter. I'd be saying, you can take me, but you leave my kids alone. You leave my wife alone. I'll go with you, but you leave them alone. And as Abraham, I would have said, take me, not my son. You promised that, we'd have generations. How can you take him away? Take me, I've lived a full life. I had a real problem with both fathers offering their children in a sacrifice of some way or another.
That's an interesting comparison. I hadn't thought about that before, because usually here what I think about is there's a parallel story in Judges where it's not a daughter, it's a concubine. But it's a similar story. They're in, they're traveling. They find refuge in a kind person's home, and all of the townspeople come and knock on that person's door, and it's like, who are these strangers that you're being nice to? We don't be nice to strangers here. Let them out that we may have their way with them. And the traveling man saves his own skin by shoving his concubine out. And they have their way with her until she's unconscious, possibly dead. It's unclear. And then he chops her body up and mails it to all the other tribes so that they will declare war on the town that did this. It's a really sick story. But it sort of culminates this cycle of Judges of like, they do a terrible thing, and then a person comes in and unites the Israelites and whatever. And so that story is kind of the culmination of all the infighting that then leads to they really need a king. But it also sort of, in parallel to this story, helps illustrate that, sometimes people read the sin of Sodom as, because they want to have their way with the men, that homosexuality is the sin here. And it's clear it's also wrong when they do it to this woman. So the sin is the inhospitality and the sexual violence, regardless of the gender of the victim. Yeah. There's yeah, Joel put the story in the chat with a little more detail. It's Judges 13 somewhere. It might be the whole chapter just recounts that story from top to bottom of like, he's not a nice man to begin with, and so that's why the concubine is running away, and he goes to find her, and that's why they are traveling in the first place, and they reunite, and she agrees to go home with him, but then on their way back, this is what happens. It's sick. But so that's the parallel where the stories feel the most similar, I guess, in detail or like in narrative to me. But to David's point about the theme of bad parents, there's also a story in, I think, Kings, where a general they're losing a war against the Philistines, as they do, as often happens in the Bible. And he says, if God grants me victory in this battle, I will sacrifice the first living thing that comes out of, my gates. And then his daughter runs out to greet him. And there are some midrashim that he doesn't really kill her, but it seems pretty clear, on the face of the text that he does indeed sacrifice his child. And so there's, so Isaac and Lot's daughters managed to survive their terrible fathers, but Jephthah's daughter doesn't even get a name.
I think I've mentioned this to Rabbi before, that Rabbi Blackmore did a high holiday sermon about the binding of Isaac, and said that there are many pointers that indicate that God didn't really want Abraham to do that this was a test that Abraham failed.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't on God, it was on Abraham. But it seems like it would be a difficult, I understand I wouldn't ever do that with my kids either, but to have somebody like God tell you to do it, it could put you into shock. And
Right.
it'd be hard to parse all that out.
Yeah.
It's a very disturbing Torah portion, just throughout. I
It
have
is.
lots of issues with it.
There's a lot to take issue with, but they say there's not a lot of archaeological evidence for this, but certainly throughout the Torah, there's a lot of references to the Canaanites offering their children to Moloch. And so there's a lot of commentary as well that these cases where it's alluded to but never actually happens, like even in the case of Jephthah, where we have no reason to believe that she survives, but it doesn't say that he kills her. Like it's left kind of vague. And so that in these cases are meant to illustrate that, like, even though they lived among these people with terrible religious sacrificial practices, and that they might be inclined sometimes to think that that's appropriate, inevitably God stops them because it's not what Jews do. So there is that. Yeah.
Another question, and if I'm monopolizing things, just say enough, Dave. I never really got what was Lot doing in Sodom in the first place. If they tend to shoot first and ask questions later, how did he even make it in there, and why would he want to be there? I got that he wanted to go away from Abraham, but why pick this evil place? Anybody discuss that?
Oh, I don't have an answer to that. Let's see. Let's go back to last week when it says that Lot leaves. Is that last week or 2 weeks ago?
I think it was
Last week, I think.
Last week. Okay.
I think.
Not okay. Let's Sodom. Oh, maybe. Does it have to do with when Abraham liberated the kingdom of Sodom and liberated Lot?
Oh, okay. But then he was already there in Sodom, right?
Yeah, but there could be outskirts, and he was not settled. Yeah, so 13:12 says, pitched his tents near Sodom. So presumably he was like close to the city but not in it, and then perhaps as the city expanded, or after this situation where he was kept, taken hostage with the city inhabitants and whatever, he managed to be, either he moved further into the city or the city expanded to incorporate the plains where he had pitched his tent. And Rashi also says, our rabbis learned from this that Lot lived among them, the wicked of Sodom, that that he was also eventually sort of punished with them, as it says in Proverbs, the name of the wicked shall rot. Because even though he survives the destruction, then his line dies out. Like so his other two daughters have children by him. I don't think they get, we don't, if they do, we never hear about it, if they get married and have legitimate children. And the children that are born from the incest are the Moabites and the Ammonites, I think. They're two people that they become a nation that the Jews are not allowed to interact with, that are, abhorrent to the Lord. And, so Lot himself doesn't seem to necessarily be wicked, but he is complacent enough that he also, his line rots, as Proverbs says.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Which is a useful lesson also, that you can mind your business and be nice to strangers and whatever, but if you accept evil around you, it'll still consume you eventually. And that's not how we do justice. No man is an island. Anything else? We're over time, but we did spend 15 minutes at the top talking about the school board stuff. So if anyone else has other comments they want to make, we can extend a few more minutes.
I guess I'm always confused right at the end of 22, or just before the end at about 15. It refers, and again, this is my reference type of confusion. It talks about the angel of the Lord, but I'm not quite sure I understand the difference between angel and the Lord and God sometimes in some of the statements.
Well, if Lord, okay, so.
And there's specific case here, but I've seen this in other sections, not just today, in section 15 of 22. The statement.
Lord called to Abraham for a second time.
Okay.
Yeah, so the angel, sometimes God sends messengers. So that's all. I mean, so here it's malach means both messenger and angel, the words are kind of interchangeable. So when God and Lord, when it's in all caps like that in the English, it almost always is, or I should say, if it's all caps like that in the English, it definitely always means God, and the Hebrew says Yud He Vav He. So it's not necessarily, so it's not the same as Adonai, like at the beginning of the Parsha when it refers to human lords. We would pronounce it Adonai, but that's not really what it says. So, but when Abraham, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, so God calls out to Abraham, God's self, at the top of the chapter. Ha Elohim Nisa et Abraham vayomer elav. So, God decided to put Abraham to the test, and God said to him, Abraham. But then once they're on Mount Moriah, I mean, one way to look at it, and I'm sure I got this from some midrash somewhere that I just don't remember, now that so it feels like I'm thinking of this, but I don't think this is an original thought, that as Debbie said, God wanted Abraham to say no. Abraham failed this test, and God is mad or sad or disappointed or whatever, and doesn't want to face Abraham right now. This is another one of God's cases. God doesn't have Moses yet to be the mom in the relationship. This is another one of those, like, just wait till your father gets home. Like, I can't even do these kind of moments that God is having with God's children there. So God sends the angel to deal with it.
Because I notice sometimes when it's the angel talking, the angel, his reference is almost though he's God himself. And in other words, he doesn't say, well, God over here said for me to tell you. He says, it's as though he's God. It's like he's his direct mouthpiece or something, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, partially, I think that's like a language thing, that's just
Okay.
part, like that's how it was written. Because we see that a little bit in the prophets too. Like the prophets will say, "Thus saith the Lord," but then you have like huge walls of text that is like coming from the prophet's mouth, but it's speaking in the first person as God.
Mhm.
So there's some of that. And then there's also the concept of I just blanked on what it's called. The mouthpiece of God. Alan Rickman played him in Dogma. Enoch was him. They think that the Midrash says Enoch became this. That's why he ascends and doesn't die. Hold on. This is going to bother me that I can't think of this word. Metatron. That's the word I wanted. The Metatron. Which is never, like, that term isn't used in the Torah, but it is referenced in commentary and midrash and mysticism for sure, and things like that, as a specific type of angel that is literally the mouthpiece of God. Because if we heard God's voice, it would melt our brains. So we have to listen to the Metatron.
Okay.
So yeah, Joel.
This book of Enoch, of course, which is not within our canon,
Right.
of course, it is also mentioned in the Talmud. About a lot of these questions, I like to think that consistent with the Wellhausen theory, beginning of the 19th century, and so we're telling stories to our children and anyone else who will listen. Like people might say, well, gee, these people around us, they're killing their children. I'm scared to death. So our answer, we're sitting around the campfire. Look, you have nothing to worry about because we don't do that. We don't follow that. So here it is written down, 586 BCE, but based upon folk tales that go back so long ago, which are deeply embedded in our brains. Like no one has to tell us that killing children is wrong, but all over the world they're doing it. But our descendants, you don't have to worry about it. That's not us. And you can take every single story in Torah. You can talk about eating chazir. You can just everything right down the line and say, no, I'm sorry, that's not us. We don't do that.
Mhm.
And there are reasons. Sometimes I don't even know the reasons. I don't even care about the reasons. And other times there are reasons. Whatever it is, we're in this together. And we're going to do the ethical thing much as we can. We're not perfect. Far from it.
Yep.
And that we're going to share with the world. In other words, I'm very happy if the entire world follows what we're up to. Okay? I'm not following them. I know better. This was
Mhm.
given to me.
Indeed. All right. Well, that feels like a good place to end. We're gonna keep following Torah to the best of our ability and stay the course. Speak truth to power. All right.
Rabbi, I just sent you a message. Rabbi Shmuley called. There's somebody trying desperately to get in touch with you. I sent the name and phone number. About a death, I think he meant. So,
Okay. I will follow that up. Is
somebody
this
from out of town.
the person or Peggy? I mean, the person or Shmuley?
Rabbi Shmuley called me and said Peggy got in touch with him. She's in New York, I think he said, but she's calling about a death in the family. That's all I know.
All right. Thank you. I'll follow up with that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
All right.